on the internet, and in this particular book, this was one of the first books I bought. It was at Barnes and Noble, and I'm sure they're in any, good-sized bookstore. And this simply has forms in it. A little bit of really generic information, but forms. You've got your pedigree charts, which you can fill out. There are things called a family group sheet, which look more like these. A lot of genealogists who trade information like these family group sheets. This gives you a place to document name, dates, place, children, all kinds of good data. And it's a nice format. If you don't have access to a book like this, again, they're online. And if you go to any of the local libraries that has the web access, just do a search, say family group sheet form, and you'll probably find 50 places that you can go to get them, and just print them right out. The other thing I had out was a research log, and this is handy to keep for each one person or couple. You write down every place you've looked for information about this particular person or couple and when you looked at it. And this helps in the case where you're working on things for a long time. Say, I don't know if I ever went to that particular place and looked at that stuff. This can help you remember that you did. And maybe you need to go back anyway to that place. But this is a nice way of knowing where you've looked for that marriage certificate that you can't find anywhere, so you don't redouble your efforts. You don't go back and do things you've already done. So use forms for as many things as you can. It just keeps things neat. If you have a software program, I use a Macintosh, so I use something called Reunion for Macintosh, and I've got it on my computer here that you can all feel free to look at. I've never used a PC in my life. I've always used Apples, and so that for me was my only option. My mother and a lot of other people I know use Family Tree Maker. I don't know if it's because they didn't read the manual. I know my mom didn't, but she has more problems figuring out where things go and how to retrieve it once she knows she's put something in there. So if you're going to get a software program, learn it. Read the manual and learn how to keep that data so that you can find it when you want it. Okay. Cite your sources. Again, when you're entering it into the computer, always add your sources. Whether if I get something from Lori through an email, that's what my source is. I don't have to make up some big grand scheme. I just say, received from Lori Wachorek on 12 September 2004, received by Laura Anderson. And that way I give some credibility to that information that I'm using. And then if I have questions about it, I can still go back to Lori and ask her if she has more information. Collect new data by going to relatives and other people. One thing I really want to do this trip while I'm here is I want to go over to Rose Lane and talk to a couple of people that are related to me by both my grandmother's and my grandfather's side. So that's an interesting connection, but I don't know them. I've never met them. I don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of things. But I do want to go over to Rose Lane, and that's an option for any of you too. Find the older people in town and ask them if they use the form, the interview questions. Do they remember, when so-and-so lived in town or when such and such event happened? That's one thing that I'd like to do. Ask your relatives by phone, by mail, by email, in person, whatever you can. You'll find that a lot of young people are not interested in genealogy. And it's the way it is. The old people pass away, and then there's nobody left to ask. So if you can get into it, if you can get your kids or grandkids into it in the least bit, I hope you can. you know, while we're young. I even asked strangers. Like I said, this lady I've never met, but I would really like to go meet this trip, is in Rose Lane. I took every Kalkuski name out of the white pages in the phone book in Nebraska. And granted, there weren't a lot, but there was probably 20 of them. And I wrote them all a letter. And I said, you don't know me, but... And then I followed that up with a phone call about a week later. So I gave them time to receive it, read it, throw it away, whatever. But then I followed up my letter to a stranger with a phone call. And it's amazing what came out of that. It was just a good way to get started, because I had nowhere to start. From online resources, you can collect an awful lot of new data. A lot of that is in your handout, and there's tons more besides just those, but those were just a few that I included today. There are genealogical websites that are good for beginners. They have a lot of beginning tips. They'll say, here's how you start. Yes. RootsWeb, Ancestry, Genealogy.com, the LDS site. Some of you may be aware that the Mormons have the largest genealogical collection in the world, by far. They send their young people out on missions across the world, and they microfilm church, civil, every kind of record that there is. There is a really good family history center, which is part of the LDS Church in Grand Island. I think I included the address and the phone number and the hours in your handout. If you've never been there, I really would like to urge you to just go and see what's there. I know several people have some good microfilms on permanent loan there, so you wouldn't even have to order something right away, but there would be something for you to look at, to get used to the microfilm machine, to get used to what you have to do to get some good news sources.
Or the Kearney LDS Church also has a family history
good.
center as well.
Good. I didn't know that. Kearney has one also. And I think I put in the handout the www.familyhistory.org, that is the LDS website. If you go to that main page, if you don't live in this area, you can click on that to find where the closest family history center is to where you live. They're all over the place. The volunteers who work in there are very helpful. They're gentle on you. They won't judge by what you know or you don't know when you're getting started. They're very nice and will help you. They do not try to recruit you. They will have, within the Family History Center, they'll have like this, a table on one side that has some literature about the LDS Church, but they don't do anything in there to make you feel uncomfortable. So, and I know that's a big deal to some people. You don't want to go into some other church's place because it just simply makes you uncomfortable. This is one of those places that's real neutral ground. Okay, so if you have any inhibitions about that, don't worry. Don't worry at all. Well, if you can get online, there are a lot of search engines at Yahoo and Google and who's the guy? Ask Jeeves. Use a search engine within the web and just put your surname in there and see what comes up. Hopefully it's not Smith again, but with our good Polish names, are you Smith? Oh, okay, okay. With our good Polish names, you get a confined amount of returns on it. I have found 3 or 4 or 5 fairly active people in Poland who have my last name, so I'm tempted to sit down and write a letter one of these days and find out what part of Poland are they from. Could they be related? You know, I don't know yet, but your Google search or whatever search engine you use will also give you hits within the RootsWeb and the Ancestry, and it'll give, lots of people put huge family trees online, and if you just search for a name in your family tree, you might find that someone else that you don't know has already put a lot of information on the web about that family, and you've got a little bit of instant connection there. Okay? Write or call the historical and genealogical societies in the area that you want to research. I know Sherman County has a historical society. It's not extremely active, I don't think. I don't hear a lot about it, but I know it's there, and I know they have a wonderful exhibit in there too. Howard County has a very active historical society. They have a bit of genealogy, but what they have is the history of the towns, the schools, the post offices, the railroad, that kind of thing that impacted your family in this area. So sometimes those societies are very useful. There are also archives. The Pittsburgh Archdiocese has an archives, and they have a website. You can go to it. You can look for, you can ask them to look for something, and they'll send it to you. You don't get to look at the records, and it's not as open, you know, as I wish. But when was the last time I've been to Pittsburgh? But if you send a request and a small fee, I don't remember how much, they'll look up something and send it back to you. I asked them about Father Anthony Claveter and what was he like? What did he do there? I've heard stuff about him. They would not go into a lot of detail, but I did find that he was what they called a fallen priest from St. Stanislaus Kostka in Pittsburgh. And something about finances overshadowed him. Well, guess what? When he was here, he sold the land that the church was to be built on. Or they were building it. I don't remember where in the timeline it falls, but he sold the land of the church to someone else outside of this area, and the good people here had to go to that man and buy the land back. So there's something going on with Father Claveter, but I don't know what. I wasn't there. There was a lot of strife. The Baduras were very active in the church, and at the time, see, you start to learn history. There was the Polish something alliance, and then there was the Polish National I'm sorry, I should have looked this up. The which one?
I think it was the Polish National Alliance.
Polish National Alliance, and another one. And if you read some historical books, some books about Poland and early Poles in the U.S., there was a faction who wanted everything Polish dominated by the church. And then there were those who didn't exactly want it through the church. They wanted it political. That's it. And there were those factions right here in Ashton. I've read it in the newspaper. You know, some people were members of this group and some were members of that group, and they were very much at odds. So the early churches were very much at odds too. Father Claveter walked into the Bohemian church at Warsaw and took it over in 1877. Well, how do you think they felt about that? You know, but so there's a lot that you can learn on your own by looking in archives and things around here. All of the towns around here have a Jubilee church book, and usually most of them have a town centennial book. If you can find those are really helpful too. Ashton, Farwell, Bolus. I don't think I've seen one for Loop City, but they're around, and I'm sure in Platte County too, because that's where an awful lot of Poles were before they came here too. But those were not those recruited families so much. Your county resources, your newspapers, the courthouse. The courthouse is phenomenal here in Sherman County. And I'm going to wrap up hopefully within 5 minutes so we can get out of here. Okay, thank you for coming. The courthouse will have land deeds, and you can research one piece of land through all the ages. You can see when your great-grandfather homesteaded this piece of land, you can see then who got it next and who got it after that. So you can kind of do your homestead's genealogy too, which is kind of interesting. But that also, again, it helps me find sons-in-laws and daughters-in-law who kind of disappeared from town. There's no obituary. I can't find anything about them after they got married, but they'll be mentioned in a land deed. You know, so things will turn up where you might least expect it. The only land office when our ancestors were filing their homesteads was in Grand Island, so they went to Grand Island to fill out all the paperwork. If you don't have a copy of your homestead papers, they're really neat. I suggest that you look for that and get it. And once you have that homestead number from the land office in Grand Island, then you can write to the National Archives and get their copies of what they have too. Use your local libraries, and don't forget about the Store Museum and Grand Island. Even though it's not right here, they have other genealogical data that will help you too. Lincoln, again, the Historical Society, and the Omaha Public Library, W. Dale Clark. They have an incredibly large selection of census on microfilm that you can use, and the people there in their historical and genealogical department are very nice and very helpful. So once you've collected a whole bunch more data, that's going to take a while, it's not going to happen overnight, then you want to organize it and present it in some way. Use your software, write it out longhand, type it, have somebody else type it for you, but in some way, please share what you find, whether it's just with your immediate family or whether it's with the Polish Heritage Center here or the local libraries or the Store Museum. Please share, because like us as beginners, we very much appreciate finding something that someone else has worked on, and you might accept and use what they have put together, but it's only part of what you're going to work on. So just, if you can, share and help. You'll find that you're able to help somebody else around here, and if you needed help where I live, I'm part of a group called Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness. So if you need to look up in Wisconsin, if you can figure out what county they might have been in, you go to raogk.org and you look for somebody who's a volunteer in that county, and they'll look it up for you for no cost, except for copies and postage. And that's a good thing, because when we're trying to research something far away, you can't get there in person, and you don't want to pay a lot for it. So having these volunteers around is very helpful. I do that for Douglas County, Colorado, if anybody has somebody there. And that's about all I have today.
Are people pretty willing to share?
Yeah. People willing to share, I'd say 95%. Very much so. Especially if you approach them in a nice, friendly manner and say, I'm looking for information about so-and-so, and you're pretty specific about what you're looking for. Just ask them to find one specific thing and not some goose chase for them. But yeah, they are.
One thing on the land records, we found out that if you don't know, who your great-grandmother was, but you don't know who her parents were, you go to the old plat records, and they'll be within 5 miles.
Yeah, usually within a couple of sections, yeah.
We're